Buckle up, sports fanatics. This is the Sports Chasers Podcast, your HQ for in-depth sports talk. Join host Kevin L. Warren and crew as they dissect the hottest stories, ignite debates, and bring you closer to the action. From locker room whispers to expert takes, we cover it all. It's game time, so strap in and grab a drink. The Sports Chasers Podcast starts right now.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? What's happening, everybody? It's another edition of the Sports Chasers Podcast coming to you. We're not live, man, but this is a tape segment, man. And tonight, man, we got a heck of a treat for you tonight, man. We got a legend here that we're going to talk to here in a little bit, man. And I'm just happy that he's here and that he's gracious with his presence, man. But before we get that, let me get all the business out the way. Let me make sure you like, click, and subscribe to our channel. Make sure you hit the bells for the notifications so you get all these wonderful notifications. And for those that listen on the podcast side, y'all make sure y'all do what? Give us that what? I know y'all can't see it, but I got my 5 fingers up. Give us that 5-star review, man. Listen, we're heavy on hockey tonight. Hockey's, they got the Four Nations tournament going on with the NHL, man. Team Canada and Team USA will face off on Thursday, man, for all the marbles, as they would say. But here tonight, man, let's talk hockey. Let me get started with Dan, the hockey dude. Dan, what's up? How are you tonight, sir?
Doing good. Good to see everybody. Good to meet you, Bruce. And I'm looking forward to chopping it up, the hockey talk.
Yeah, me too.
Got you, man. So let me introduce my guests here. Our guests, I should say, here tonight. Tonight, we have a powerhouse in the world of sports journalism joining us, a 2-time Gemini Award-winning Bruce Dowbiggin has spent over 40 years in radio, TV, and print, bringing bold, irreverent, and thought-provoking insights to the game. He's the editor of the Not the Public Broadcaster and the author of several must-read books on hockey, including his latest, Deal With It, The Trades That Stunned the NHL and Changed Hockey, now available on Amazon as he holds it up. He knows how to take the cues. His book, Inexact Science, you got that one too, was named one of the top professional hockey books of all time, and Money Players was a finalist for a Canadian Business Book of the Year. Wait, there's more. Bruce has covered it all, from breaking the Allen Eagleson scandal to analyzing the business of sports with razor-sharp commentary. His work has graced the pages of the Calgary Herald, the Globe, and Mail, and CBC News World, and he continues to shape the sports conversation through his columns, podcasts, and beyond. He's here tonight to give us the inside scoop on hockey, sports media, and much more. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Mr. Bruce Dowbiggin. Welcome to the Sports Chasers, man. Let me give you some applause.
Yes. Media guys don't usually get applauded, so it's pretty rare.
Yes, you guys are very much hated, man. But Bruce, thank you so much, man, for hanging out with us tonight, man. Like I said, we just want to have a conversation with you, man, and want to go over your illustrious career in journalism, man. And listen, as podcasters, man, I would like to think, and I really take this seriously, that we're in the space of journalism now, right? And here at the Sports Chasers with the 7 guys, I should say, because we have a producer also. We absolutely take it seriously. And what is your thoughts, real quick, with the podcasting landscape? Your thoughts, what do you think? Good, great, bad?
Yeah, I remember when social media started and we had people who weren't affiliated with conventional media would show up at press boxes and stuff like that. And at the time, I remember having some arguments with guys because, like, when you worked for a newspaper, a TV station, if you said something that was wrong and you got sued for libel, there was a sense of you had to back up everything you said.
That's right.
And I remember saying to the guys who were coming into social media at the time, I said, in some respects, I think you guys should put up a bond or something to be here, because we don't want people just shooting their mouths off and being able to say anything they want. And if they get it wrong, they go, oh, never mind. Because they have nothing to lose. In our case, I got sued when I was doing a piece about corruption in the NHL Players Association, and the guy sued me for libel. We won the case, but we stood to lose a lot of money, And so social media has changed all of those things. Just too many people I know throw stuff out there. They don't back it up with facts, etc. And it for the people who do the job right, it makes us all feel like, you know, we can't be believed because we let these other guys shoot their mouths off.
That's a great starter for what you're saying, and also too, I think here in the States, I don't know how much it is in Canada, but here in the States, you'll have some of the journalism. I'll just talk about the sports journalism.
Yeah.
How now they have become de facto agents for said players now, and I think that's no good, and it's one of the reasons why we started what we're doing. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, one of the things when I started in broadcasting, especially television broadcasting, but radio as well, you know, I was trying to get scoops, I was trying to get stories and all that sort of stuff. And I found out for me, and I don't know about your experience in the past, but I found out for me that some of the best guys to talk to are agents. Agents would talk to you and tell you stuff that nobody else would.
Yes.
I mean, everybody knows. You see the guys, they go into the dressing room after and they try to get a quote from the guys. Most of the guys, you know, they don't give you anything. And I understand that. But I had to find, you know, some material, and I got to know these agents. But you also have to be able to sometimes say to the agent, you know, I'm not doing that. The agent then sort of thinks, well, you know, I'll just keep feeding him stories. He'll do them all.
Right.
And you've got to be able to stand up and say, no, I don't think that's right. And you know, push back on them. But the agents have always been pretty helpful to me. And again, when I started doing the corruption stories in the NHL Players Association, this is back in the early 1990s, I had several really top-notch agents who were helping me by giving me that information. But yeah, it's really, you know, one of the other things that also gets me is, you know, I'm sure you've talked about the Cooperstown and the Halls of Fame and the voting for the awards and stuff. I've always been uncomfortable with the fact that journalists are the ones who decide who goes into these places. We're not supposed to make the stories. We're supposed to follow the stories. And you know, we got all these debates. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? Should he have, like this year with the MVP in the NFL between the two quarterbacks? I mean, that's not really to me our decision to make. And I've always been uncomfortable with us doing that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of ethical lines in sports too that are a little softer than the news side.
Man, so who you think should make the please don't tell it's the fans, because man, the fans do a bad job, I think, sometimes.
Well, no, I don't. Well, the fans can have part of it, let's say, but
Okay.
I think if the league wants to do this, then you should have, maybe they should have 25 people who they pay to be judges and choose them from right across the strata and have them do it. But they can't be making the news and covering the news at the same time. It just doesn't work. And I know some guys are really scrupulous and there's a line, they won't do it. But you know, what was the example recently? It was wasn't it going into the Hall of Fame? Oh, it was
I would say
going to the Hall of Fame in baseball, and somebody wouldn't vote for him in the first ballot.
Yeah, I remember that. And sometimes some journalists, you know, we good, bad, and different. They might hold grudges, like, you know, Terrell Owens. You know, Terrell Owens should have been, you know, probably first ballot because he was a great receiver. But here he stands, and you know, he didn't make too many friends, as you probably remember and know.
Yeah.
And there you go. And somebody says, oh, I'm not voting for Terrell Owens because he was a jerk off. So
I'd say more in baseball. Baseball has been the worst for guys, media guys holding grudges. Obviously, in baseball, the big thing was the steroids. And there's a lot of guys who just will never, as long as they have a vote, will never vote for guys who did steroids, etc. And at the end of the day, I think you've got to be, you can't let your own personal thing get in the way of it. You got to do what's best for the sport. They've given you a vote, and you've got to say, does that guy belong in there? And I'm one of those people who feel like Pete Rose and Bonds and those guys should be in the Hall of Fame, but their plaque should say, you know, the controversy that surrounded them and them getting in.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, Barry should absolutely, Bonds should be in there, and Pete. Yep, Pete, you did better on it and stuff like that, and he'll probably get in, as we can probably say, posthumously, because of they wasn't going to let him in. They wasn't going to let him in. And
now that he's dead, he's safe.
Yeah, when he's dead, they'll do the whole 9 yards, and they'll let him in. Same thing with Barry Bonds. What got you into the career of journalism before we stop onto hockey?
I mean, I was always a sports fan, and but it's kind of funny. I was doing some other stuff, and I took a job part time with, you remember old TV Guide magazine, the little short thing that
Yes.
everybody had on the TV. Well, I ended up getting a job as the Canadian sports editor for TV Guide magazine, and I didn't really intend to get into it. I wanted to be a more creative writer, or maybe work in movies and theater and stuff. And this just came up as a job. And the next thing I knew, I was getting hired by people to do stuff. I got hired to be the morning sportscaster in Toronto for CBC. And I didn't really have that much experience, but they said, well, here's an interesting new guy. Let's put him in there. And that's how my career got started, was getting into through a TV Guide magazine. And at the end of the day, I didn't expect it to last that long. And again, here I am 40 years later.
40
I
plus
still
years.
haven't written that other book, the one that I was intending to write when I was a young guy.
The book that you just held up, deal with it, the trades that stunned the NHL and changed hockey. What was the one specific trade that you think, in your opinion, changed hockey forever?
Well, obviously, most people would say the Gretzky trade. Just to take a little bit of background, and I wrote this book, by the way, with my eldest son. He works for the Canadian equivalent of ESPN, and he's a stats guy. And so he and I have written this book together, and we wrote the previous book together too. But about 7 or 8 years ago, I wrote a book about how I believe salary caps are killing pro sports, and it started out as the history of how we got to salary caps. It had all the biggest contracts, starting with Babe Ruth right up to the present day. So I can understand, and so people could understand how we got to the salary cap situation. And I think it still holds up. And I think, as we watch what the LA Dodgers are doing, basically, blowing parity out of the water in baseball, that this sort of thing hangs in there more and more. But to get back to your original question, the Gretzky trade was really important because it was money dictated the trade, that he get traded from a small market to a big market. And then, of course, getting to LA, he made hockey respectable and marketable across your country. And it was a significant trade in the sense too that whoever thought a guy who was at that level in any sport would ever get traded. And he did. And for people who believe that the small teams should always have a chance to win, it was a bit of a blow because Edmonton was a smaller market. But for people who understand that it's a big business, they needed him in LA. They needed him there. And the baseball people do that all the time, of course. As we see, they're all getting into New York and LA in baseball. The NBA has been the same way. The NFL is a little bit different, but in any event, it got us interested in not just that trade, but we said, well, what would be the 7 or 8 biggest trades? And we didn't just want to say, oh, it's a trade. This guy went for that guy, and they needed a point guard, or they needed they needed a running back, or whatever the theory was. We wanted to show the evolution of trades, starting back around the time Bobby Orr came into hockey, which is 1966, up until the present day. In those days, you traded a guy for a guy, and that was it. And as we know now, and we're heading into the NHL trading deadline, and we've seen the NBA one go by. Now they trade favors, they trade contracts, they trade all sorts of draft picks, etc. So the whole thing has evolved, and we chose a series of hockey trades that would illustrate the evolution of trading in the world. And obviously, our friend Mr. Tkachuk, who's having himself a week, Matthew Tkachuk, the final chapter is about him being traded from the Calgary Flames, a team that I've covered in the past, to the Florida Panthers. Right now, I'm in Florida, not too far away from their home arena, and that was an example of all how the trades have changed over the years.
I'm going to shut up after this because I'm going to get my man Dan in here because he's the hockey dude. But that going back to that Gretzky trade, I remember vaguely when I was a teenager, and when that went about, that absolutely changed the landscape for the league. And the league was able to go into Sunbelt places. Like you say, you're in Florida right now. The Panthers are playing in Sunrise right outside Miami. Phoenix, well, probably Phoenix is a bad example, being that just moved
Utah.
Moved to Utah. They had Minnesota move to Dallas. I think those moves was really great in putting NHLs in not familiar places, where put them in the Sunbelt places, and places like it's in I can't think, Dan, Raleigh, North Carolina,
Yep.
and things of that nature, man. So I that trade I believe really juxtaposed the NHL to how's your thoughts on that?
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, obviously, it's a marketing thing. The NHL sort of has looked at expansion sort of like Kentucky Fried Chicken. They want to put one in every city, right? And they want the product to look the same in every city. That's why they're so big on parity. But the thing that's interesting about what happened going to the Sun Belt was people thought, okay, it'll just be entertainment. But you look at Team USA this week that they're going to play Thursday. Austin Matthews grew up in Phoenix, and we're getting star players who are coming from places where the only ice was in the bottom of a drink in the previous years, and we're getting stars. And so hockey as a game, as a culture, is caught on in a lot of cities in the United States, and it makes for a bigger talent pool, which obviously makes for more exciting and great hockey when the best players get together.
Gotcha. Dan, go ahead.
No, for this, looking at the impact for the game itself, this one by far takes the cake for the reasons stated. Now, like the NHL, as much as people boo and can't stand Gary Bettman, he's helped grow the game to the point where it is now that you have teams in California. Like Gretzky going to LA was massive. One, they were killing it in Edmonton, with all those cups. And then as that team kind of dismantled and got older and players went other places, they finally moved it. Because I think that they need, like, Edmonton was hurting for money. So they got like 15 million as part of the trade.
15 million as part of the deal. It was 1988, summer of 1988. It was a trade that when I first heard that they were talking about making, I couldn't believe it. As a Canadian, I couldn't believe they would trade him. But anyhow, in the summer of 88, they just won their 4th Stanley Cup in the decade. And the problem was that a couple of problems. The owner was low on money. He was losing money. And he was convinced He was convinced by Jerry Buss, who owned the LA Lakers at the time. He was convinced by him that he had to maximize the value of this guy, and that he had to get the value of him, because if he left it go too long, Gretzky wouldn't be as good in a trade. You wouldn't be able to get as many good things. And he convinced this poor guy in Edmonton that this is what he should do. He should trade him and get value for him. And today, actually, we don't think of that as being all that radical. They do that in a lot of cases. But in 1988, it was just like, where the heck is this coming from? And the second thing was, at that time, unfortunately, the Canadian dollar was very low against your American dollar. And you were having to make like 30 or 40 cents on every dollar more in Canada to keep up with the American dollar. And this owner in Edmonton couldn't do that. And so it was economy. The economy, it was also kind of the change in things. And Gary Bettman, God bless his black little soul, but he learned a lot from the LA guys. He learned a lot from Bruce McNall, because McNall understood how the league had to expand. Now, he ended up going to jail, but Gary learned for other reasons. But Gary learned from him how to market in the Sun Belt, and how to market like all those places now we see have teams.
Gotcha. Dan, go ahead.
No, I thought it was kind of fascinating too. Like, not only the money that they gave up, but Gretzky and his bodyguard McSorley and Krushelnyski, they all went to LA. Yeah. And then in return, they got Martin Jelena, Jimmy Carson, and like 3 first-round picks.
Yeah. And so the irony in all, sorry to interrupt. The irony in all of that, of course, is that Gretzky goes to LA to make the LA Kings a champion. He never wins another Stanley Cup after he leaves Edmonton. But Marty Jelena, who went the other way in the trade, he ends up winning a Stanley Cup in Edmonton as a player on the 1990 team. So it doesn't always end up that way. And we follow that up, of course, the 2 big trades for the Oilers. The second one was Mark Messier to New York. And that was a huge thing because, as you know, Kevin, the Rangers were always, they couldn't win. And as opposed to Gretzky, Messier went somewhere and he brought his juju with him, the stuff that made him a winner. And that's a hugely significant trade too, because it brought back New York as a market.
Let me tell you something. I'll never forget that 1993-94 season. If you remember, the Knicks were in the finals too against the Rockets. So it was a double bonanza, and you had the whole O.J. Simpson chase and all that stuff during the time. It was a heck of a time in New York. And the Rangers, I believe the Rangers won first. and I went to the parade when they won. Of course, it was just bedlam because the Rangers hadn't won in like 40 some years. Because Dan is going to say it, he's probably going to say he's going to yell 1940, but whatever. Probably can yell 1990, 94 now because it's been a while. But it was just so magical. It was just so great, and like you said, Messier brought that juju, that aura to the team, man. His whole thing with the conference finals, yes, and the conference finals against the Devils, where he guaranteed stuff, and hey man, he did like Joe Willie Namath, man. He said, hey man, we're gonna win this one, man. We're gonna go to the cup, and then they went on and beat Vancouver. Yeah. So that was a heck of a thing. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Bruce.
Well, I was going to say, in all of the trades that we do in the book, we do them in depth. It's not like 3 or 4 pages and then it's over. We take a trade from the start of its origins right through to the finish. So in the case of let's say the Mark Messier trade, we go right back to when Messier came to Edmonton to be a player on the team, how his career went, and then we have him going to New York for the Stanley Cup, and then we follow him to the end of his career, so that people who read these chapters will be able to assess, was that a good trade? Did it work out in the way they expected it to? And there's all sorts of good history, and you'll win a few bets and bars with some of the stuff in there that we put in there.
Right. I got a question on that note.
Yeah,
you would go following the progression of the trade till its end. How long was the Eric Lindros trade chapter?
Well, I'd written 10 or 11 hockey books, and previously I had written about the Lindros trade at least 3 times. And when my son and I were talking, Evan and I were talking about doing this book, I said, I can't do the Lindros trade again. It's just like I've done it so many times. And I've got to tell you that the Lindros family was never very cordial about, when you get in touch with them. They were a hard bunch of people to please. And I said, I just don't want to deal with them anymore. So we thought, how can we mention the Lindros trade in a way that's different for us? And of course, what we did was we talked about it in the context of the Patrick Roy trade from Montreal to the Colorado Avalanche. And that allowed us to talk about how the Lindros trade was the one that made the Colorado team, at the time they were in Quebec City, how the stuff that Quebec City and Colorado got in the trade for Lindros is what made them into champions. And the cherry on top of the sundae, of course, was Patrick Roy as the goalie who came from Montreal to Colorado. So it allowed us to talk about the Lindros trade and talk about your crazy stuff. I mean, they traded him twice. They had to get an arbitrator to come in and decide which was the trade that the league would accept. The arbitrator just happened to be the uncle of Todd Bertuzzi. I mean, it was all goofy stuff, but in the end, it worked out. And although Lindros didn't win a Stanley Cup for Philadelphia, he helped them to build the new arena. He was the kind of linchpin that they used to sell the new arena, and so he delivered that way. And they did get to one final with him. And unfortunately, he just kept getting hurt. But he gets drafted. He spends a whole year saying, I'm not going to Quebec City. I don't want to go to Quebec City. And they finally trade him the next year at the draft, just as the draft's happening. So it's what I can't think of a trade that went on as long as that one did in any of the sports I've ever covered.
Wow. That's definitely something. Dan, you had something else? I'm sorry.
No, I was just looking at it in like the haul of players that they got back in return was just crazy. And a couple of draft picks, like I think they ended up drafting Josh Montivo with one of those picks.
Yep.
And that's when they turn around and send him to Montreal for Patrick. That literally won Colorado, what, 2 cups?
2 cups, yeah, in Colorado. And of course, Patrick was an interesting guy, and that whole chapter is a lot of fun because it allowed my son's a Habs fan, so I said, you write that chapter, you go ahead, because he has all his opinions on what was good and what was bad and how they made mistakes here and there, and so I let him write the chapter. But it's interesting because it represented the end of the Canadiens era. The Canadiens up until then were like the Celtics. They'd been around since the 50s, winning cups. They always seemed to win every 2 or 3 years. And people in hockey were like, oh, boy, these guys are so good. And the Patrick Roy trade was the end of the magic for the Montreal Canadiens. Since then, they did get to the Stanley Cup Finals once, but they haven't won another cup, and they're kind of a middle of the pack team now. They're not a team that everybody wants to play for anymore, and so it was really significant in that respect.
Wow. Let me ask you, this is funny. This is a funny thing. I was talking to Dan about this. Of course, as you saw me cheering, I'm a Rangers fan.
Yeah.
The Islanders, the Leafs, the Islander fans, they're still mad at John Tavares to this day. This trade went on for like 6-7 years now.
Yeah.
Are we ever going to get over that, Islanders fans? What's your thoughts on that? I think it's so funny. I saw something on social media where the guy was he was in the penalty box. I think Tavares was in the penalty box at the Islanders' new place, and he was yelling at him. He's like, I say, hey, dog, man. I said Tavares left like 6 years ago, man. I think I should get over that. Go ahead, Bruce. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, the Tavares thing is, but he was brought in to help the Leafs win a Stanley Cup, and they haven't won a Stanley Cup. So I don't know what the Islander fans are bitter about. I mean, yes, he left, but there have been franchise guys who have left other teams. What hurts is when they leave a team and then they win a Stanley Cup in the other place. So we just talked about Patrick Roy. Talk about a guy like Phil Esposito back in the 1960s. He leaves Chicago to go to Boston, and they win a Stanley Cup. Then, as the fan of the team that traded away, then you can get bitter. But the Islanders, listen, they won 4 Stanley Cups. It's not like they had nothing going in the rest of their lives. And Tavares has been a very serviceable player for the Leafs, but he's far from their star. He's far from the key guy there anymore. But listen, fans get an attraction to a player, and it's kind of hard to explain sometimes.
Yeah, it's definitely. Let me take you back to expansion, because I think I'm kind of sometimes fascinated by expansion. The NHL. Are we going to do Atlanta again?
Yeah, they're talking about Atlanta. Well, the franchise that they really want to get is Houston. They want to get a team to Houston. They don't necessarily want to transfer someone there. I think Gary has convinced the owners that if he can bring in Houston as an expansion team, they would be the first $1 billion expansion team in the NHL. If you transfer them from one city to the other, it's harder to get that kind of money. So I would expect you're going to have a team in Houston as an expansion team. But some of the teams, like for instance Winnipeg, which lost its team back in the 90s because of economic problems, they're in economic problems again, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go. I would think that obviously you mentioned Atlanta. The problem with the Atlanta team, and I don't know if you guys, how much you know about Atlanta and hockey and, well, sports in general, but there's a whole bunch of people who are north of the city, who live north of the city, who it's a fair drive to come in to town. And, for the hockey fans, they just didn't want to do it. The stadium was right downtown, and people just didn't want to do it. And it's been a problem for the Hawks. It's been a problem, for other franchises. But apparently now the latest thing they're talking about in Atlanta is having an arena that is further north of the city, where it's a little closer to the suburban ticket base. So listen, it can work if you win too. That's the thing that now I think, Kevin, you said you've been in Florida sometimes. You live in Florida
here for almost 10 years now. Yes, and like I know you're probably going to talk about the Panthers. And when I first moved here, they was absolutely talking about moving this franchise.
Yeah,
absolutely. They say goodbye, but winning solves everything. They had a parade here on the beach.
Yeah.
This past June. All is well with the world.
Then you mentioned the Hurricanes. I mean, yes. When they went to North Carolina, I said, North Carolina and hockey. I mean, that's NASCAR country. What are you doing there? But of course, they won a Stanley Cup. And once you get that tradition, and the fans have a tradition that and a year they can look back on as a magic year, that makes the marketing all that much easier. Phoenix, I still think Phoenix is a terrific market, but they just didn't win. They just didn't win a championship, and then they stuck the arena in the wrong part of town. Much like Atlanta, it was in the wrong part of town. And so that just doomed the franchise. And if you get it, well, some places, Dallas, the Stars are a good franchise, but they've never won wait, they did win a Stanley Cup. What am I talking about? I was thinking of the Minnesota North Stars. They used to be the North Stars. Right. But anyhow, there are teams that have not won a Stanley Cup in good markets. The Minnesota Wild, for instance. That's hockey country. It's as much a hockey country as you can get in the United States, and they've never won there. So that's all it takes is that one magic year.
Got you. I think Dan can address the Carolina Hurricanes. Dan's been to a couple games out there. Dan's right outside of Charlotte. I used to live in Charlotte, and like I said, I'm in South Florida now. Go ahead, Dan.
Nah, like I'm obviously a Penguins fan, but like when I moved down here, like the closest hockey that we have is the Charlotte Checkers, which used to be the farm team for the Hurricanes. And so as they were getting better, like a lot of these younger kids like Martin Necas, Nedeljkovic, I'm trying to think there's a couple other ones that played through here and then got called up and traded or whatever. But going to a Carolina Hurricanes game in the playoffs is the loudest building I've ever been in.
Eh? It's a good atmosphere.
These people, like the fan base they have there is very, very strong. You could roll up there at 3:00 in the afternoon for a 7:30 game. They're already out tailgating. I mean, they're ready to go. And like, I think it was, they played Washington and they end up beating Washington. They scored an empty netter or something. And it was so loud in the building. One, you didn't hear the horn go off. Two, you couldn't hear the public announcer read off who the goal scorer and assists were for. You couldn't hear anything. But they got a really great fan base. And, you know, now that they got the guy that owns Topgolf run the show, they're making trades. They pick up Mikko Rantanen, which that would be modern day or modern time crazy trade.
Yeah.
You know, nobody thought he was going anywhere.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Well, neither of the guys in the trade thought they were going anywhere. No. I mean, it was really a dramatic trade. And I mean, we had at the end of the book, we have my son and I each did our collection of the 25 most important trades, because we could only do chapters on 7 or 8 of them. But we wanted to include all sorts of ones that were there that people talk about. You're talking about the Islanders, of course. There was a famous trade where they picked up Butch Goring in 1980. Mm-hmm. And the Goring was the final straw that they had to make that into a championship team. And we thought hard about making it into a chapter, but we just weren't sure that made the cut. But we wanted it to be recognized. And so at the end of the book, you can compare his list and my list as to one of the most interesting trades ever was in 1964. Sam Pollock was the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, and he just ripped everybody off. He was so smart. But anyhow, in 1964, he traded for this goalie by the name of Ken Dryden, who was playing collegiate hockey somewhere, and he got him from the Boston Bruins, and he disappeared. Nobody knew anything about the trade for 4 or 5 years, and then all of a sudden they get into the playoffs in 1971, and this lanky goalie, all of a sudden he shows up and he wins the Canadiens the cup. And it's symbolic of how the Canadiens always seem to find guys that nobody else could find. And that's a great one. And the 3 other guys in the trade, I think they all ended up selling insurance, or I don't know, operating tow trucks. I don't know what they did, but Ken Dryden became a Hall of Fame goalie.
Wow, that's pretty good. Let me ask you this, Bruce, about rule changes. So like I said, we had a show last night. We talked about the NBA and the All-Star game and fixing the rules and guys competing. And I said one of the things for the regular season, man, I think they should implement a legal defense. You should be able to check your man and no more zone for that stuff. You're a professional basketball player. I think you should be able to check your man, no more zone, right? You just double team. Yeah. My question to you, because the question got brought up. So they said something, one of the guys on the panel said last night about baseball, how baseball was becoming dead because everybody was shifting people all over to the right side of the field or the left side of the field, depending on the analytics. What do you think about some of the rule changes, or are you satisfied with the rule changes, or for scoring, or lack of scoring? What do you think about hockey right now? Where is that? You're
talking about rule changes for the NHL?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's been a huge change, and Dan could speak to this a little bit, I guess, but been a huge change in let's say the last 10 years that fighting the way we used to know it in the league is gone. It's one of the ironies of the fights the other night between Canada and the United States is neither team has a guy who is quote unquote a fighter. And yet there they are, they were brawling away. But anyhow, taking fighting out of the NHL has, in some respects, opened up the game more. You can't have guys who are just there to be thugs. You got to be able to skate. You got to be able to do all of the stuff that everyone else does, and it's made it a faster game. For if you haven't been to an NHL game, let's say in 10 years, you go. The pace is absolutely stunning. Yes. I mean, a basketball can get that way, when they get a great basketball game and the pace is going up and down the court. It's like that all the time in hockey. They just flip over. A good example is, I don't know if there's any other sport you could have this example, but in hockey, in the days of, let's say, Gordie Howe and those kind of people, a shift would be a minute and a half, maybe even 2 minutes. Nowadays, you go 35, 40 seconds, full out sprinting, and then you're off the ice. And they just roll the guys out. So it's produced a really high tempo. My biggest beef, though, and Ken Dryden, but the same, we mentioned him, he's written a book about this subject too, is just that the goalie equipment and the goalies are just too good, that either you make a bigger net or else you've got to make the equipment smaller. It's almost cynical. They're so big and so strong, the goalies. And they're able to block stuff. And nowadays, if you want to score 5-on-5, you basically create a riot in front of the net so the goalie can't see, and then you hope it goes in off somebody's ankle or somebody's pants or something like that to go into the net. Now, I don't find that as exciting. I love 3-on-3. When they had the 3-on-3, I guess it was Sweden and Canada, I believe. I don't know if the USA. Sweden and Canada, 3-on-3. It's just brilliant, man. You can see the skill and the movement, and all that sort of stuff. So, but I'm an old time guy, so I enjoy skating and shooting.
So you didn't enjoy the New Jersey Devils with their neutral zone trap back in the day?
Oh, that was well. Listen, we almost had the worst team in the history of the Stanley Cup playoffs win the Stanley Cup, and that was the team that I was covering, the Calgary Flames. They were the clutch and grab champions of all time, and as much as it would have been nice for them to win for the city, it just was a disaster for hockey. And it allowed them to, because they had a lockout right after the Calgary lost to Tampa Bay. They had a lockout for a year, as you know, and there was no hockey. And when they came back, they really did open up the game, and the Jacques Lemaire and the trapping and all that sort of stuff, they took it out of it. So it's better that way. But I just wish that the goalie equipment wasn't as big. Again, I don't know if you know this, but the goalies have the catching glove, and he's got this big cheater that goes right here. So even if he kind of misses it, it hits there. It's like you have a tennis racket, and then they give you a second racket to hit the ball in case you miss it. I don't know. As a purist, I don't like that.
It reminds me of back in the day watching Gar Snow play.
Yeah,
he looked like the Michelin Man.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He'd take the chest protector off, and he was my size.
Yeah,
he'd get in net. He's like that guy, the commercial where they put the whale or the seal in the net.
Have you ever did you ever even today, but even then, did you ever see those goalie sweaters in real life? And you'd see what they were. It was like a tent. The guy was wearing a tent. It was so big, and they would catch pucks in the material under the arms and stuff. And so, as I say, I just think that they've got to relook at that. I get into arguments with hockey fans. I said, listen. The catcher in baseball stands back there. He's got a couple of shin pads. He's got a little thing on a little padding on his chest and a cup, and that's it. And he doesn't get any kind of protection. And a goalie, all of a sudden, a goalie's got to have all this stuff. And I think if the catchers in baseball can wear little stuff, then hockey goalies can do it too.
Well, frozen vulcanized rubber might hurt a little bit more than a baseball.
Well, they can wear a mask. I'm not saying they don't wear anything, but you get a foul tip on a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, and you get that in your arm or your shoulder, your knee. That hurts too. That's as damaging as a puck can be.
I used to catch in high school for my high school team, and I can even say that now, from back then to now, the baseball's catcher's equipment has absolutely gotten thinner. Of course, I think it's better than what I was using and utilizing, man. But it's I've heard some hockey pundits like yourself say, "Hey, we might as well use a soccer net." These guys got on so much gear.
Well, should that be bigger? Yeah.
Yeah, and then you couple that with like Vasilevsky, who's like 6'5". Some of these goalies are so tall that like their waist is at the crossbar, so when they're on their knees, they take up the whole net still.
Well,
It
I know
used to
you're
be.
not that old. You're not as old as me, Dan. But back in the old days, when you were starting in hockey, if you were a small guy, you played goalie because they didn't do any of the blocking in the same way. It was all catching and kicking with your legs, and you always were standing up. You never went down on the ice. That was the way you played goalie in the old days. So you look at some of the old guys, and some of them barely got their heads over the crossbar. They were so small. But in those days, they didn't, until Bobby Hull came around with the slap shot, they didn't have to worry too much about getting down on the ice. And then finally, and we mentioned Patrick Roy, he and his goalie coach revolutionized how goaltending was played, just as you mentioned. I think he's about 6'3", and he would basically make himself big, go down on his knees. And he said, look, 70% of the goals go in just on the ice surface. So if I block the entire ice surface, that's 70% of the time I'm going to keep the puck out of the net. And so how do we do that on a full-time basis? And it's taken us a long time to get around to sort of correcting the change to having better equipment produced.
Yep. That's definitely very interesting. Let me ask you this. Best player, I shouldn't say best. Who's the coolest player or the most pleasant player you ever covered?
Well, pleasant and cooler, those are different things.
Yeah.
Those would be different things. There's some very good players who weren't particularly much fun. I mean, to me, the best player I ever saw was probably Bobby Orr. Now, again, maybe I'm showing my age, but they always said that Bobby Orr could play center the way Gretzky did, but Gretzky couldn't play defense the way Bobby Orr did. And unfortunately, Orr was playing in the era before we had really good surgery for knees and stuff. And so he never got his knees taken care of. He should have played 15 or 20 years. Instead, he really only had about, I think, 10 or 11 good years. So he's one of the guys who I would put up there. And I got to know him later in life when we were doing, the stuff about the corruption at the NHL Players Association. Bobby was one of the guys who supported us in making sure that we got his former agent, who was the guy who was doing all of the malfeasance, that he helped us a lot in giving us documents and things like that to help us make our case. So I have an autographed Bobby Orr rookie card somewhere as a result of all that sort of stuff.
Oh, that's pretty neat.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. Let me dive into that journalism aspect, that investigative journalism. What made you start, with those, because there's some heavy stuff to cover. Some people might not be one to, have anything to do with it. And then there's some people that, hey man, we got some really, as you just said, some malfeasance going on and it needs to be exposed and uncovered. What was your thought process? How did you get engaged into that? How did that all come about?
It wasn't to be popular, I'll tell you that much.
Okay.
I made a lot of people mad at me for doing those stories. I will say that there was a reporter in Boston who I worked with, a guy named Russ Conway. God bless him. He's passed away since then. He and I were sort of developed this material. But I've always enjoyed, like I was a guy who enjoyed All the President's Men. I liked stories about journalism and good stories. And somebody came to me, and actually I know what happened. I was reading a book about this subject. And I said, I can't believe that nobody talks about this stuff. This one guy, Alan Eagleson, who is running the Players Association, who's buddies with all the owners and the commissioner. I said, I can't believe no one's done this story. And so I ended up meeting a few of the players who were protesting about it. And at first I thought, oh, well, maybe they just don't understand. They're not educated guys. Maybe they don't understand how these things work. But the more I found out about it, the more I realized this was really some bad stuff. I mean, one guy who I got to know quite well, he was a player, a first-round draft pick, and then he ended up being an agent. And then he was finally the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks, Mike Gillis. And I got to know Mike because he was an Eagleson client, and Eagleson basically stole his disability insurance. Yeah. Mike had a severe broken leg and had to retire, and Eagleson took a percentage of his disability insurance. And that was the kind of guy he was and the kind of stuff that was going on. And I felt like, I had to do right by these guys. I had to do right by these guys because I knew this stuff and it needed to be promoted and publicized. And so I was very fortunate that people trusted me with some of these things about healthcare and the other stuff that Eagleson did. And it was very political too. I remember once doing an interview before the last president of the NHL was John Ziegler, before Bettman. And I remember interviewing him at the All-Star game in 1992. And I don't think he expected me to ask the questions I did. I had really good information about fraud, about a lot of stuff, maybe even RICO stuff for the league. That would have been a RICO problem. You know, that's huge a problem for them. And he hadn't expected me to ask those questions. And, you know, he was very, very sort of brusque and not very happy with me during the interview. And I thought, okay, well, we got good stuff. And then anyhow, the interview ends and he goes into the next room and I can hear him yelling at the PR guy. How did you let this guy in? What are you supposed to tell me? But the sort of the peak moment for me for doing the story was when Eagleson was forced by the FBI, basically started looking into him, the U.S. Justice Department, and he was forced to resign from the Players Association, and he had a press conference to retire, and I was there. And this was right at the peak of all these things going on. And he was taking interviews. And again, I said, I didn't do it to be popular. And most of the other reporters around me didn't want to do this story. They didn't like the story. They thought I was some sort of, smart ass to do this type of thing. And so they were just asking him softball questions about, oh, Al, what's the greatest moment you ever had? And whatever. And I just piped up and I said, Al, I said, you've always been Mr. Canada doing International Hockey Team Canada. I said, if you're so Canadian, why do you take your pension and your salary in American dollars? And there was this pause and everybody went, and he turned to me and he said, when did you stop beating your wife? And he asked me that in a press conference. And I said, not a problem for me. I've never started. Oh yeah, we've heard you do. And so he was trying to humiliate me publicly
and deflect
for doing this work. So as I say, over the years, it has not made me popular. The equivalent of, I don't know what the equivalent of the NFL Monday Night Football or whatever it is, Hockey Night in Canada, those people never wanted me on. I never got on their shows. They basically alienated me because I was not good for business.
All because not only you did your job, but you kind of took a stand with that. Right is right, wrong is wrong, and people like that gentleman. I don't even want to call him a gentleman. He should go to jail. This just
briefly.
Yeah, I did read up on it, and
the thing was about the story. I can remember early on saying to my wife, I said, the thing about this story I don't understand. She said, what? I said, why am I the only guy who sees this? Like, I thought that there would be dozens of people who would see this and want to do this story, but nobody else really wanted to do it except my friend in Boston, Russ Conway. He and I we were out there on our own for a long time, and I kept thinking, there's some magic bullet he's got that he's going to embarrass me. He's going to bring out some facts that I didn't know. And in the end, when he was in court doing testimony, he never had it. He had nothing there. He had nothing that he could bat us down with. We were right on all the stuff that we were doing. And it was a great day for us. It didn't make anyone like us anymore, but it was a great day for us because we knew that we were right on this thing. And Marvin Miller was a huge fan of, I was a huge fan of him, the baseball guy, because he did right by the baseball players. And every time I was doing this story and I thought, oh, well, I've done it long enough. I just thought, what the hockey players needed somebody to do for them what Marvin Miller did for baseball. And that kept me going.
Absolutely. Shout out to Marvin Miller. He was good indeed. A baseball rep there for them. Let me ask you this, Bruce, when it comes to journalism now and your thoughts on sports journalism in the States and in Canada, and how do you think it's going? Do you like the scope of it? Do you think there's some room for improvement?
It's so tough now, and you guys know this very well, that it's controlled by the TV networks. A small number of people control most of what's going on, and maybe some advertisers. It's very difficult these days to have access and to get close to stories, because these people, they don't want anybody making their business go bad. They don't want anybody asking questions about it. And so for most guys, it's go along to get along. A lot of the reporters I know, I could do this story or that story, but you know what? It would just be too much of a hassle, and they may not let me into the dressing room anymore. And so there's a real intimidation factor for a lot of reporters. And unfortunately, I just think that there's too much There are lots of people who do a great job, but there's just too much interviewing. Hey, how great is it to be you? You know, that school of interviewing. It's so boring. And when you were out there and everybody was cheering you, how did that feel? You know, I mean, all of these, what color is that red light questions? You know, I mean, it's just to me, there's not a lot of creativity in a lot of it. And again, there are people who are doing terrific jobs. There are some terrific women sportscasters and journalists who I really admire, etc. But it's so hard when the leagues are so tied up with the broadcasters to get anything else out there. And I've always admired the guys who did that, but we have the guys today, for instance, who are the insiders. So it was Wojo was doing the basketball, and then we had a few guys in other sports who were doing it, and they're the insiders, but they're only insiders so far as they're allowed to be insiders. If they get too close to something that's really dangerous, if they report that, they won't be insiders anymore. They'll be pushed away. So I know they work hard, and I don't mean to impugn everybody, but there's just too many conflicts for us to do the job in the way we used to.
What do you think about athletes having podcasts? Active athletes having podcasts?
I'm a free speech guy.
Okay.
I think 90% of the ones that I hear don't give me anything that I don't already really know. It's fun to hear them joke amongst themselves, etc. But if I think I'm going to get some insight, not many guys are giving much insight. That's why guys like Pat McAfee and guys like that are such stars, is because they're willing to say some stuff that's a little bit different. I think he was mouthing off when he was still an active player too. But by and large, the players, you know, they don't say too much other than just silly, goofy stuff, etc. The ones that do give you insight, man, it's really great when you get them. That's one of the reasons that the NBA panel, it's on TNT, right? Or is it TBS?
No, it's on TNT.
TNT. One of the things is those guys are so honest, and they were there and they played, and so it gives it, you know, that works. It has a lot of integrity. But I just see too many people who are, you know, shooting the bull and and pretending they know more stuff that they don't really know.
Let me go back to what you said about the NBA guys and Charles Kenny and the rest of the crew, Shaq and them. And I really love them. Like you said, they're honest. And there was I forgot who wrote the article, but somebody wrote an article a couple of months ago about how Kenny and Shaq and them, they're just killing the NBA. And I'm like, see, this is what's wrong with the media.
Yeah,
this is wrong with the media, because we won't call right and yellow and so forth and so forth. We know that we have a problem, and Shaq came out and absolutely said, "Yo, the NBA is boring." Draymond Green, who got I think he was trying to be a shock jock the other night, but he claimed he said that, hey, the NBA is whack, is boring and stuff like that. And I say, Draymond, that's pretty cool that you say that, but you do know that you was part of this problem, though, right?
Yeah.
It was the generation beforehand. So I what you're saying is spot on. I just really wish media folks be more honest, but they're not going to be honest. And again, I think that's one of the reasons why you have mediums like podcasters now who are willing. They don't care. We're not beholden to nobody. You're independent. So if you see something or you hear something, you're going to report on it and hopefully give the story the legs. Not the legs. Give it the meat that it needs for it to be covered.
As long as you're able to back up your story and you've done it properly and you've sourced it properly, go for it. I got no problem with people, even if it upsets people. And I kind of had a rule when I was reporting on people that typically I didn't do their private lives. I didn't do their private lives and talk about whatever they were doing on their spare time or whatever. I just felt that the only time I would report on that would be if it was affecting their performance on the ice or in a game. That was when I might change my opinion a little bit of that. But by and large, I let people have their private lives and do all that sort of stuff, and that's fine. But if you don't produce on the court, and it's partly because you're out all night partying, that's on you. That's on you. And I would say this one other thing because of hockey too is that so many. Well, I guess it's maybe about 50% of the players now are Canadians. The Canadian hockey players are brought up to be boring. They're brought up to be nice guys. They're brought up to be humble. The humble gene to sort of started with Gordie Howe and people like that, and they were farm boys from Saskatchewan. Oh shucks, and that scene in Bull Durham where they're teaching Nuke LaLoosh how to speak to the media with cliches and stuff. The Canadian guys are very good at being boring and saying nothing. They're not, it's not in our culture particular to be disruptive. Other cultures, other communities have different attitudes towards it.
I got you, Dan. Take it away with the Four Nations. What you got for them for the Four Nations?
I think this has been wonderful for the game. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the All-Star Weekend, the normal one. Yeah. Like, I like the skills competition and that kind of stuff. That's fun. But the game itself, the 3-on-3, short games, like, it's kind of like pick up at practice. There's no hitting, that kind of thing. And every once in a while, people do try. But what they're doing this year, because I believe Bettman said that they're going to try to do an international tournament every 4 years, like offset of the Olympics.
Yeah.
So if, granted, it was only the Four Nations this year, obviously, because the political climate with some of the countries, that they're not going to have them in there. But, them doing this every 4 years and then having the Olympics every, offset, that means we only really need 2 All-Star games in between those.
Yeah.
So I'm happy, and I'm hoping that it turns out to, be as good as what they're doing now. But this stuff has been great. I mean, these guys are like, these aren't regular season games. There's no points. There's nothing. It's this exhibition, and the way that they're playing is unreal. Like, if you watched, I think it was what was it Sweden and Canada?
Yeah.
That Marner scored the overtime goal. I mean, that's the other thing is, like, they're using some a little bit different rules. Normally it's a 5-minute overtime. Yeah. They got it to 10, so that goal wouldn't have happened in a regular game because it was at like the 7-minute mark. But you see, like how invested all these guys are into a game that means nothing other than pride for your country. And
it's authentic. I mean, there's an integrity to it because it's authentic, and they're competing. I'm just shocked. I mean, I've always, having covered the NHL for a long time, a lot of the guys don't want to go to the All-Star game. They'd rather go to Cabo for a few days and just get away from everything. But even for the guys who went, it was a nice time, and there was all sorts of parties, and you could go places. I can remember being up. It was like 3 a.m. on a Saturday night, and the game was on Sunday. And I think it was on South Beach in Miami. We were at the Delano Hotel, and there were all these hockey players who were up on tables and doing stuff. I mean, I appreciated that they needed to unwind, and that's why this whole thing is the intensity of this is so shocking to me that these guys were willing to put it all on the line. Now, part of the reason is, and this gets back to my great friend Mr. Bettman, is that this is the first best on best hockey we've had in 15 years. So these guys have also had a lot of pent up, like Sidney Crosby. He wants to play against the best players. He wants to play in games that matter. And he hasn't really been able to do that. The NHL games and Stanley Cup games, obviously they're important, but they want to play best on best. And so there was a lot of pent up energy to do that. And then, as I say, you added all the political stuff with your president suggesting we should merge with you guys. It'd be the 51st state. But there was a lot of pent up energy. But even at all of that, I thought that they would sort of do a kumbaya thing at the start of the game and sing the anthems together or something. And then when the Canadian fans they booed, it was disgraceful, booing the Star Spangled Banner. When they did that, all bets were off. That's when they said, okay, we're going to go to the mats here, and just intensity. So yeah, you can't fool people about it, right? They'll watch the NBA, the winning team get 212 points in the All-Star game, and they know that's fake. But with these games, they're leaving it all on the ice.
Yeah, I saw PK was on one of these morning shows on ESPN, I think it was.
Yeah.
And Subban, he laid it out there, you know, what the NHL is doing, why it's good. He's like, you can't go out there and go through the motions like you can in basketball. He said, you know, you got to be all invested and all in. And, you know, like the NHL kind of set up the tournament, but it was up to the players to make it what it is or what it's been. So, you know, if they're not bought in and they're on the All-Star weekend mentality, maybe it wouldn't have been that great. But
no, it wouldn't have been.
But 3 fights in 9 seconds opening Canada.
Yeah,
you can't get better than that.
One of the arguments I made in my book about why I think salary caps are bad, and the book is called Cap in Hand, how salary caps are ruining pro sports and how the free market can save them. And I wrote, as I say, I wrote this about 7 or 8 years ago. And one of the points that I was making in it is that the future of pro sports, and this has to do with cable and has to do with Amazon and all these people now buying rights, is that it's become global. These are global spectacles at the top end. And the NHL still seems to think that it's still a little league in North America, and, you know, and we know who our fans are, et cetera. And if you look at what the NBA is doing, what the NFL is doing, and in particular what soccer has done going globally, and so it has fans around the world, that's the future of pro sports. Best on best. People don't want to see, I don't know, the Sacramento Kings playing the Atlanta Hawks on a Tuesday in February. They want to see the best teams as often as they can, and the leagues that are ignoring that are missing out. I think that is the future. And salary caps, of course, hold you back from that. Salary caps are all about distributing players across 20 or 30 teams. And the argument I make in the book, I'm going on here at length, but the argument I make in the book is that I think the soccer people have it right. In soccer in Europe, you play at the level you can afford. If you're a big market, you're a big boy, you can pay the stuff, you can play in the first division. We don't have teams, though, in the first division who are just there because somebody wanted to have 20 teams as opposed to 18. Everybody is in there and they know what the cost is. And I'd like to see that in all our pro sports. I don't suggest anyone lose their teams, but as you know, the soccer in England, they have first division and second division and third division. And, you know, if your owner doesn't have a lot of money or you're a small market, you play at the second division, but you also have your team tradition, your uniform and all that stuff to go forward. And I think that the future of pro sports is global, and we'll see more and more of that. And this kind of a presentation is not going to hurt in terms of the NHL selling itself globally.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. One of our my co-hosts on here, the DA, he absolutely would love you. He would probably give you a hug if he could, because he always has talked about pro sports here in the States, being like England, with soccer and Europe, about soccer and regulating teams and things of that nature. Hey, if you ain't got the money, you ain't got your money up, you won't be playing.
Promotion and relegation, and the idea that this is so stupid. Well, what other industry do we take the teams that can't run their businesses properly and are losing money, and we say, oh, we're going to give you all the best new employees in our industry, we're going to give them to you? No, why should we reward bad teams with the best next top players? Why should we reward them? They should have to earn it. To me, I think that the idea of drafts and stuff should, at the very most, be maybe one round, so you get the superstars distributed, but the rest of the guys are free agents, and you sign the guys that you need and when you need them. This idea of tying up all the talent only drives up the price of the talent too.
Wow.
Yeah, I got an idea that I think would be awesome.
Shoot.
It really doesn't matter what sport it is.
Yeah.
But there's nothing worse than watching a particular sport and teams participating, and one knows they're not in the playoffs. So what are they doing? Losing. Why are they losing? So they could get that pick. They should relegate that back to, it's not the worst record that gets the first pick.
Yeah.
It's the first one that didn't make the playoffs. So
I've had that same idea too, because you're to the end of the year, you're trying hard. You're not going to make the playoffs, but you continue to try hard. Absolutely.
All the games are competitive because everybody's trying to get that pick.
Yeah, because not everybody can be in the playoffs. That's just the nature of it. But you're forcing teams to be competitive. And again, if you follow soccer, and I follow a little bit, I'm not a huge fan, but I do follow it. the whole thing about relegation and promotion is a big deal. It's a big incentive for you to put a good team on the field or on the ice each year, because if you don't, you're going to go down into the second division, and the money that you will make will be like 1/10 of what your franchise would make when you're up in the Premiership. So there's all these incentives for a team to play better, to compete harder, to find ways to win. And the system under salary caps is all disincentives. It's all, you don't want to win. And as you just said, let's finish last and get in the lottery for whoever the next star is.
Wow. Nah, that's yeah, dang. I wish the DA was here. He always been talking about it. I was like, man, I don't know about that here in the States.
Oh, come on and talk sometime when DA's here. And
oh no, we're gonna absolutely, Bruce, have you back, man. And because he'll probably be mad when he sees, yo, Kev, you should have had me on with Bruce, man. But he always speaks about that, and the way how you just put it, it does make sense. Because Dan, being from Pittsburgh, he's a Pirates fan also, and I'm tired of him. I'm tired of him taking my Yankee money for his owner to go to South Beach or whatever they do with the money, because they ain't really trying to win.
Amen. Well, my team was the Montreal Expos, and they just didn't have the money. They didn't have the money, and in that case, they let the team go. They let the team go to a market that could afford them, and it's as sad as it is, and as much as I'm upset about it, not having the Expos around anymore. Hey, listen, if you didn't have the money to do it, why should we have propped you up?
Can it work? Can it work now up there, you think?
In the right stadium, yeah, I think so. I mean, they would have to win too, but Montreal is also, as Dan might know, Montreal is also a little complicated because there's politics there with the French people wanting to separate from Canada. That's always a problem. But it's a great sports town, and obviously the Canadians are an example of that. And when the Expos, the years they were there, they were very popular. I used to go to the games all the time. I'd like to see them back, but I don't want to see them back just as one team in a 35 or 36 team league where the talent is all spread out. I'd like to see them, but I'd like to see them in a league where the competition and the players are more concentrated in a fewer teams than we have now.
Gotcha. If there was one NHL history, one moment that you can rewrite, what would you rewrite?
Oh, well, I mean, just one of the things that I'll be selfish here. I was doing this book, as I said, I got to know Mike Gillis, and he became the general manager of the Canucks. Mm-hmm. And under him, they were the best Canucks teams ever. And they went to Game 7 in 2011 and lost in Game 7. And I've been so invested in the team and writing the book that it was a huge disappointment that they'd gotten that far. I was hoping the book would be able to end on the chapter that they won the Stanley Cup. I'm being selfish here, but it just viscerally, it was really hard. And you guys, you have your teams, you know what it's like at the end of a season where you thought you were going to win and they didn't win. So, I mean, for me, that's the most recent one. The Expos had several years in which they should have gotten in. You know, their best years were in the days before you had wild cards. If you won the National League or you won your division, and that was it. They could have gotten into the playoffs for about 5 or 6 straight years as a wild card or whatever team, and I think they might have won one of them. But
that 1994 team, they should have. If that strike didn't happen, I believe the Expos would have won the World Series.
What a great team that was!
It was a great team that didn't. Unfortunately, the strike ended that, and that was it.
Yeah. So I mean, those are those things. And one of the things that you have to do, though, when you're in what I've done over the years is you can't really be a fan of the teams. You have to be a fan of stories. So people say, "Oh, who's your favorite team?" I said, when I was a kid, it was the Detroit Red Wings and Gordie Howe. But that was when I was a kid. Now I root for good stories, interesting stories, because that means my work will be better. It'll be more interesting, and I'll have people reading and watching it or whatever it is. And so I've, at the 5 or 6 years I was following the Canucks, I was really interested in them. Now I couldn't give a flip, because they're boring. But show me a good story, and I'm always like all over a story and or a person, that sort of thing. One of the guys, it just as an aside, we're talking about the corruption in the NHL Players Association. One of the guys who got me into the story was a famous player from the Toronto team in the 60s by the name of Carl Brewer. And Carl had the courage to when nobody else was questioning Alan Eagleson and the Players Association. Carl, for about 15 or 20 years, was basically, pushed aside. And then finally he was able to find people who believed him, and he got lawyers and he got people on side. And eventually Eagleson went to jail, and Carl was responsible for so much of that. And I so admired his courage and his persistence. And, in those years, obviously that was a story that I was wrapped up in. I was invested in seeing it come to an end. And just to see human beings and people stick with their principles and find something and overturn a guy who was as popular. He had prime ministers and Supreme Court justices who were his buddies, and they bailed him out all the time. And so to take him on for Carl was great. And unfortunately, Carl died a little young, and I did the eulogy at his funeral. Right. But just, as I say, as a human being and somebody who stood up for something that needed to be stood up for, that helped me have the courage to keep doing the story.
Gotcha. Man, I can talk to you. We can talk to you for hours, man. You just got so much full of stuff, man. We're going to definitely have to bring you back again. Let me ask you this last one thing.
Yeah.
What advice would you give real podcasters that's really trying to do it in the media space? What advice would you give them?
Be honest. Be authentic. Don't just take shots. I mean, the Stephen A. sort of taking pot shots all the time. People think that's the way to go. And Stephen's sincere about some of the stuff, obviously, but be sincere, be honest about what you're doing, and the public will recognize that. But if they think you're just taking shots for the sake of taking shots to get your face and your name out there, they'll leave you. They won't stay with you. But once you get that integrity from them and they understand that where you're coming from, that's one way that you sell your product.
Got you. Dan, did you have anything left for Bruce before we get out of here?
No, I just think I need to take it a little bit easier on Toronto.
Well, I think again, I said the thing about don't be a fan of the teams that you cover. And I'd grown up in Montreal, hated all the Toronto teams growing up, and there I was the first of all the morning sportscaster, and then I was the 6 o'clock TV sportscaster in Toronto, and I didn't like any of the teams, but it allowed me to be more objective in reporting on them because I wasn't a fan. I would, if they lost, I didn't go home and kick the dog type of thing, as the way a lot of guys do. They just get wrapped up with their lifelong team and they're covering it, etc. And don't do that. Don't do that. You need objectivity.
Well, that's my thing. Is like I don't hate them. I just don't think the way that they're set up with the salaries that they're handing out to forwards. That's the way you construct a winning team. Yeah. If you want to go far.
And part of the evolution of sports in my era, and as I say, I wrote a book about it, but part of that evolution was learning what salary caps meant, what they were going to mean down the road about balancing off stuff. The capologist now, I was talking to my brother Gord the other day, and he was talking about the capologists in the NBA. There's so much going on. It's so busy. There's so many darn things about it. But you have to be able to report that sort of stuff as a sports person now and understand it and understand what the shortcomings are. Like I'm a Buffalo Bills guy because I enjoy watching Josh Allen. But, I also know that I understand that they have to do a balancing act with their salary cap. And those are things that happened when I started. It didn't matter. No salary caps or no balancing. And nowadays, that's something you have to know how to do.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the author, if you hold that book up for us.
I sure will.
Deal with it. The trades that stunned the NHL and changed hockey. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Mr. Bruce Dowbiggin. Make sure you get the book.
Get it on Amazon. Go on Amazon. That's where you can get it there in Kindle or book form on Amazon. And I'd be happy to have you guys pick it up and read it.
Got you. Bruce, this has been a blast. Like I said, man, I got to have you back. The DA is absolutely going to be mad at me that I did not have him on this panel. But he'll be all right because he's really into the journalism thing. And what you said about that relegation thing, always been preaching that thing, man. But this has been a delight for us. I'll let Dan have his words and you'll have the final words and we'll get on out of here.
This was awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. With your knowledge, with all the the hockey trades and everything going on. Yeah, I hope we can, get together, down the road, maybe, talk about this year's trades at the trade deadline. Yeah. But who do you got on Thursday?
Yeah. I'm thinking that Canada's going to win. The teams are even. Had Canada had the American goalie, they'd have won. It was because the Canadian goalie whiffed on a few, and he whiffed on a few against Sweden the other day. Yes. Finland too.
That is the only difference between these two teams is the caliber of goaltenders they got.
So I'll say Canada just because the teams are so close. Plus, there's a couple of injuries on Team USA that are, I think, problematic for them going forward.
And I think they got a chip on their shoulder from the first one.
Yeah.
I think Canada's probably going to win too.
Yeah.
Sid ain't going to let them go down.
Yeah. Well, as I say, it's set a whole new bar too for the other sports. I mean, the NBA guys, sashaying around this weekend and party. They look pretty lame by comparison. I think a lot of people looking at them and saying, "Hey, wait a minute. Why can't you guys get serious about playing?" So I think that it'll have that value. I hope so. It'll have that value.
Oh, we destroyed them last night on our show.
I bet.
We absolutely did, man.
Yeah.
Bruce, final words, man. First of all, I just want to say again, thank you. Many thanks to you, man. I appreciate you coming on and gracing us with your presence, man, with your knowledge of hockey and with your 40 plus years in the journalism game, man, and some of the nuggets you drop for those that's really trying to really go in this media space and do it the correct way, the proper way, the honest way, and doing it with integrity and doing it with, where you can sleep at night. There's some people that, they like to not sleep at night, and I can't do it, man. So
yeah, they get getting close. In spite of the fact that you were a Rangers fan, I've been able to sort of put that aside for our conversation. But keep doing what you're doing. Absolutely. And bring good people, interesting people on, and don't be afraid to stir it up a little bit. And the players don't respect guys who suck up to them. The reporters are always sucking up to them. The players know what it is, and they don't respect them. They respect the guys who report honestly. So keep doing what you're doing, and you will get that respect, and you'll be fine.
Bruce, I appreciate that so much. Listen, we're going to get out. He had the last word. He dropped that nugget again. Listen, we're going to get out of here. Bruce, don't go nowhere. Listen, on behalf of myself, I'm Kevin Elwarren, your host and moderator for Dan the Hockey Dude, for our special guest tonight, Mr. Bruce, man. Thank you so much, man. Yo, this is a Sports Chasers podcast. Y'all be good. Y'all be great, man. We'll catch you on the flip side. Peace.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Sports Chasers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms, and connect with us on all social media channels for exclusive content and updates. We'd also love for you to join the conversation, share your thoughts, and become part of the Sports Chasers community. And remember to tune in next time for some more real sports talk. Until then, stay frosty.